351 Jinlan Village. When Fong Kai heard this answer, he sneered and asked, "You said that you came to place an order, then which factory are you from? What's your name?" The young man in the blue and white shirt was stunned for a moment, but he quickly reacted and blamed her. "You guys looked for the police since the price wasn't settled? If you know which factory we're from, you look for us to cause trouble, so I can't tell you." The police officer frowned as he watched the scene in front of him. He didn't know which side was telling the truth, but he still sided with Fong Kai. In this day and age, everyone was afraid of going to the police station. Who would call the police for no reason? However, if the other party only threatened them verbally, without evidence or other witnesses, they were helpless. If there's any conflict, try to resolve it in private. The police officer left. Fong Kai and the two employees of the office were furious when they saw their competitor's nonchalant expression. The young man walked to Yu Bing and said again, "Leave the city immediately. Otherwise, what happened today won't happen only once." Yu Bing chuckled. "Including paying people to extort money?" The young man smiled as a threatening look flashed across his eyes, but he didn't say anything. Yu Bing was smiling, but there was a hint of coldness in her eyes. "In order to set up a trap for us, you guys even involved the elderly and children. Can't Jinlan Food Factory use honorable methods to compete with us?" The young man's smile froze. He was shocked that they had been followed to the factory, but he quickly regained his composure and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Yu Bing said, "I'm going to your factory now. Do you want to come along?" The young man didn't reply. He returned to sit on the sofa. Yu Bing smiled and said to Fong Kai, "Fong Kai, let's go to the Jinlan Food Factory." Fong Kai glanced at the few young men who were sitting there calmly and revealed a provocative smile before leaving with Yu Bing. When the few of them saw that Yu Bing was serious, they looked at the young man in the blue and white shirt in unison. "What should we do?" Little Hai frowned at Lin Ji and Zhao Peng, who were watching his group. He thought that it was fine as long as someone stayed here to keep watch. That female factory director didn't look like someone easy to deal with, so he had to hurry back and inform Jinlan Food Factory. The reason Jinlan's people were in such a hurry to make a move today was that the order Zhao Peng had negotiated yesterday was also an old client of Jinlan's. Therefore, the four of them came today to keep an eye on the people from the office and cause trouble wherever they went, so that they couldn't continue negotiating. After making the arrangements, Little Hai left the office alone and took a shortcut back to the factory. After the bus stopped 2 kilometers away from Jinlan Village, Yu Bing and Fong Kai got off the bus and found a passerby to ask for the route. Then, they walked for another half an hour before arriving at Jinlan Village. The two of them saw that most of the people working in the fields were women, and even children around 10 years old were there. However, under normal circumstances, unless the farm was busy, most children would be arranged with some other easy work. Moreover, less than a third of the men in the field were men, but most of them looked to be in their 20s. There were also some elderly men, but there were few men in their prime around. Fong Kai found it a little strange. Why are there so few men in the field? Yu Bing also found it strange, and the two of them continued walking. When they entered the village, they saw that there were some younger children carrying baskets and preparing to go up the mountain. Without exception, they were all dressed in very shabby clothes, even worse than those of Yu Mountain Village's villagers. However, Jinlan Village was in the suburbs of the city. No matter how bad conditions were, it shouldn't be this bad. Moreover, this village had a food factory. Just as she was feeling puzzled, Yu Bing saw a young man in a blue and white shirt and a kind-looking middle-aged man in his 40s appear. When she saw the man's tan skin and red tank top that had been washed into a light pink color, Yu Bing was speechless. The middle-aged man smiled at Yu Bing and Fong Kai as he extended his hand. "Hello, I'm the village chief, Su Jin. Welcome to Jinlan Village." Yu Bing smiled as she shook Su Jin's hand before letting go. "Hello, Mr. Su. I'm Yu Bing, the person in charge of Delicious Food Factory." Fong Kai also extended his hand. "Hello, my name is Fong Kai. I'm from Delicious Food Factory's management department." Su Jin smiled and nodded. "The village committee is only a few steps away. Come to my office." Yu Bing and Fong Kai exchanged looks before following him to the village committee's office. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 352 Negotiation. At this moment, an armless man walked out from around the corner and had canvas bag in his mouth. Because of the man's sudden appearance, Yu Bing and Fong Kai were shocked. The man couldn't say anything and could only look at the two of them apologetically. When Little Hai saw this, he said to Yu Bing and Fong Kai unhappily, "What's there to be afraid of? Why are you doing business when you're so timid?" When Su Jin saw this, he gestured for the man to leave first. Then, he glared at Little Hai and said to Yu Bing and the other two, Little Hai is a little hot-tempered, but he doesn't have any ill intentions. I apologize to the two of you on his behalf. Yu Bing and Feng Kai felt a little embarrassed. They didn't have any intention of discriminating because they usually only came into contact with people with dislocated legs or blind people. They rarely encountered people with mutilated limbs, so they only lost their composure when they suddenly saw him without any mental preparation. When Yu Bing heard Su Jin's words, she explained, we didn't mean to be rude just now. Su Jin nodded in understanding. He also knew that Little Hai was dissatisfied that they had snatched the order and was just using it to make a fuss. After changing the topic, the group quickly arrived at the village committee. The office was also very simple. There was a conference table at the entrance. Although it was a conference table, it was actually a rectangular board placed on two long stools. Further in, there was Su Jin's desk. Su Jin sat at the head of the conference table. After Little Hai poured 2 cups of water for Yu Bing and Feng Kai, he stood behind Su Jin and looked at Yu Bing and Feng Kai with an unfriendly expression. Su Jin looked at the two young people in front of him as he said slowly, I won't waste your precious time. Let's get straight to the point. Yu Bing didn't want to beat around the bush either, so she also went straight to the point. I'm all ears. Su Jin explained his request according to the situation he had encountered in the past. I hope you guys can exit the market in East City. Yu Bing chuckled. What if I don't? Although Su Jin had a smile on his face, his tone was very firm. Miss Yu, you're not the first person to say this. The food factory offices that you mentioned previously have already left East City. We're not greedy. We only want the market share of East City. You can open an office anywhere, so why do you have to go against a small food factory like ours? Giving up wasn't Yu Bing's way of doing things. Mr. Su, you can chase 1 or 2 away, but there will always be one you can't chase away. Instead of spending time chasing competitors away with all kinds of underhanded methods, it's better to think of improving your strength. If you're interested, we can have a good talk and see if my suggestion can bring some good changes to your factory. Su Jin was unmoved when he heard this and said with a frown, since you insist on staying, we can only show you our abilities. I'm not talented, but in order to protect my livelihood, I'm willing to go all out. When Yu Bing and Feng Kai heard this, they couldn't help but frown. The negotiation had just begun, but the other party had already expressed an attitude of wanting to fight to the death. Even if they really established themselves in East City in the end, they would definitely have to pay a huge price. Yu Bing realized that the other party might not intend to negotiate with them at all. In that case, there was no need to continue with the backup plan. Since Mr. Su has made up his mind, let's rely on our own abilities. Su Jin smirked and said with a smile, Little Hai, help me send off the 2 guests. Little Hai revealed a provocative smile at Yu Bing. Fortunately, he returned in time and reminded the village chief of the painful lessons of the past. Otherwise, the village chief would have been deceived by these treacherous merchants again. Every time, they would either request to cooperate or make suggestions. They even said that they had many tricks up their sleeves. They were the ones who had more tricks up their sleeves. Please leave. Yu Bing and Feng Kai could only leave first. On the way out of the village, Little Hai was called away by a child. Little Hai was in a hurry to leave, so he could only point in the direction and let Yu Bing and the others leave the village alone. Then, he left in a hurry. Feng Kai looked at Yu Bing and said, this village seems a little strange. Also, that village chief's attitude is also weird. How can they negotiate like this? Not to mention Feng Kai, Yu Bing couldn't figure it out either. However, compared to this, Yu Bing felt more troubled about not knowing what Jinlan would do next. The 2 new employees in the office definitely couldn't handle it, so between her and Feng Kai, at least one of them had to stay. However, it was hard to say how long it would take to resolve the matter here. After all, they lived near East City, so it was very convenient for them. For Yu Bing, having to deal with trouble every few days was very annoying. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 353 Jinlan Food Factory. Yu Bing and Feng Kai were discussing softly. Ah! The 2 of them exclaimed in low voices again. Another disabled person appeared at the fork a meter away. He was also a man. The top of his thigh was completely gone and he used a short wooden block that was slightly narrower than his lower body as his lower body. He held a small wooden board with both hands as he moved forward. When the man heard a sound behind him, he hurriedly turned around. When he saw that it was 2 unfamiliar young men and women, he immediately smiled and asked softly, Are the 2 of you here to see our village's food factory? Previously, there had been a few times when outsiders came to look for the food factory, so the man asked enthusiastically. Yu Bing was stunned for a moment, but Feng Kai had already reacted and hurriedly replied, Yes, we came here to look for your food factory. The man was secretly overjoyed. The number of orders had decreased recently, so he smiled and said, "Follow me. The factory is ahead." The two of them realized that the man thought that they were going to the factory now. Since the negotiation had failed, there was naturally no need to go anymore. However, although the man had lost his legs, he wasn't slow at all. In the blink of an eye, he had already walked a few meters. When he turned around and saw that the two of them were still at the same spot, he enthusiastically shouted for the two of them to follow. Yu Bing and Feng Kai were too embarrassed to refuse, for fear that they would let down his good intentions, so they followed him. They planned to find an excuse to dismiss him at the door and leave the village. After walking for about 100 meters, they saw the Jinlan food factory. The factory was built on the roadside of the village's main road. It occupied an area about the same size as the delicious food factory, but the buildings were more dilapidated. Yu Bing was about to thank the man when she saw him walk through the door. He even turned around and introduced the factory's products to Yu Bing. Yu Bing and Feng Kai realized that this man might be an employee of the factory. The man introduced the products as he entered the factory. The moment they entered, the two of them were shocked by the scene in front of them. There were about 30 disabled people working in an orderly manner. The only ones with healthy limbs were 5 female workers. The factory was very clean. Although they were doing production work, it wasn't messy. Everyone was wearing the same clothes, masks, and hats. The only special thing was that there were chairs beside the workbench. Many people with their legs amputated were sitting on it and working. Some of them had both hands intact, while others only had one hand to operate with, but their speed was no slower than that of ordinary people. Although we're disabled, we're very fast. All these years, the factory has never been late in delivering the goods. Don't worry about your orders. After talking for so long, the man's tone was still as enthusiastic as before. Little Hai saw Yu Bing and Feng Kai when he arrived at the production room after moving the goods from the warehouse, so he quickly walked forward in shock and shouted, "Why are you guys here?" The man looked at Yu Bing and then at Little Hai. "Aren't they our customers?" Little Hai's expression froze. No matter how intense the competition was outside, they had a tacit understanding not to tell the workers in the factory, "Yes, but the price hasn't been agreed upon. They're leaving the village." The man nodded and said with a smile, "Little Hai, even if you guys can't reach an agreement, you have to pay attention to your attitude." Little Hai smiled at the man and replied, "Got it, third uncle. Hurry up and go do your work. I'll greet them." After the man left, Little Hai's smile immediately fell. He turned to look at Yu Bing and Feng Kai as he said with displeasure, "You actually dare to use my third uncle to enter the factory. Are you trying to steal confidential information? Hurry up and leave." After Feng Kai came back to his senses, he rolled his eyes at Little Hai and said in disdain, "Who cares about your factory? Our products are much better than yours." Feng Kai and Xiao Hai argued as they walked in front while Yu Bing followed behind thoughtfully. When Yu Bing came back to her senses, she had already walked to the village entrance. The quarrel between the two of them had also come to an end. As Yu Bing looked at this young man who wasn't even 20 years old, she understood why his threatening gestures sometimes seemed a little exaggerated. It was because the purpose of his threats was self-protection, not harm. Yu Bing looked at Little Hai solemnly. "Little Hai, why are there so many disabled people in the village?" Little Hai paused for a moment, then he replied mockingly, "Why are you asking this? Do you want to mock them? Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much." 354 Similar. When Yu Bing heard Little Hai's answer, she knew that the people in the village must have been mocked. She asked gently with a smile, "Am I that vicious in front of you? Don't you want us not to take up your market share? If you tell me the reason, I'll consider your request." When Little Hai heard this, he wasn't appeased. Instead, he became angry. "Liar! Are all your tricks so similar? We don't need your pity." When the food factory was first established, in order to defeat the local food factory and get orders, Jinlan's price was lower than many factories, but the subpar taste had always been Jinlan's disadvantage. However, it was precisely because of this that the other food factories didn't take them seriously. In addition, everyone was local and more or less knew about their situation. Therefore, they weren't that ruthless, and Jinlan was able to barely survive. However, a few years ago, some food factories from other places slowly began to enter East City and set up offices. In order to expand the market and get orders in the early stages, they would give discounts. Moreover, they sold novel food products from overseas. Everyone liked novelty, so Jinlan's business was affected as a result. At that time, Little Hai was only 17 years old. When he saw this situation, he and a few friends threatened them. From then on, Little Hai became a local tyrant. After everyone found out who the mastermind was, they came to the village to negotiate with the village chief. At first, the village chief told them the truth and hoped that everyone could leave a portion of the market share for Jinlan. However, although they agreed on the surface, they secretly spread rumors that the disabled employees of Jinlan Village's food factory were unhygienic and used their feet to make food. However, those who could enter the factory were people with dexterous hands. Moreover, they had specifically gone to a large factory to learn before working in Jinlan. However, how could the people outside know so much? When they heard this, many employees boycotted Jinlan's food. It wasn't until Su Jin persuaded them to invite all the agencies they had worked with in the past to the factory for a visit that the orders resumed. Jinlan's profits were quite low, but they had no choice. To others, it was just a little bit of profit, but this factory was those workers' hope. There were a few times when he was schemed against, so Little Hai hated out-of-town offices very much. He would use all kinds of methods to force any food factory office discovered to have the same customer base as them out of each city. Although Yu Bing didn't know the details, she could guess when she saw Little Hai's irritable and resistant look. Little Hai, you might have been deceived by others before, so it's normal for you not to believe me, but I really want to help you. You might have eaten our products before, so you can tell how good they taste. If I really compete with you, you might not be able to win, so I have no reason to lie to you. Although Feng Kai and Little Hai had quarreled just now, when he saw the situation in the factory and thought of the scene in the village, he knew that something must have happened in this village. Feng Kai also had a good impression of those resilient and optimistic people. If possible, he hoped to help them. Seeing Little Hai's resistance at this moment, he also helped Yu Bing persuade him, that's right. Our factory is very efficient and is spread throughout the entire province. Moreover, what Miss Yu said previously makes sense. If you don't think of a way to increase your efficiency, you'll eventually lose your ground. Little Hai looked at Yu Bing and Feng Kai, then he lowered his eyes for a moment before saying, 10 years ago, the exploration team dug out a coal mine 80 kilometers away from our village. They gave us a lot of money and went to the surrounding villages as well. Every young and strong man in our village went to earn money. Things were fine the first year, but then there was suddenly an earthquake. The coal mine collapsed, and many people were buried in the well. Many people in our village died, and few survived unscathed. Most of them barely survived. Many people are disabled to varying degrees because of this. Although they were given some compensation and medical expenses, it isn't enough for them. They can't participate in farm work anymore, so the village chief found a way to set up a food factory. This way, they have a place to work and at least support themselves. The food factory is their lifeline. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 355 Not a match. Humans were very insignificant in the face of nature, but the magical thing about humans was that no matter what they suffered, there would always be people who dared to fight against fate. Yu Bing had always liked people who loved life and were full of vitality. She smiled slightly and said to Little Hai, do you want to earn more money? Little Hai was still a little wary, but H's eyes couldn't help but flicker. In order to attract customers, the factory had also produced new products, but the effect wasn't great. They only had old customers who wanted cheap things. The reason people were attracted to new offices every time was because of the subpar taste of the food in Jinlan Village's food factory. Why are you helping us? We're competitors. Feng Kai chuckled. Our factory director wants to conquer the entire country's market. You, who only want to stabilize your position in a city, are not our match. If anyone else heard this, they might be furious, but Little Hai was completely different. 10 years was enough for him to recognize the strength of Jinlan Food Factory. He would be satisfied as long as he could stabilize Jinlan's position in each city. Feng Kai's words made Little Hai feel relieved. People would be envious and jealous of those who were slightly stronger than them, but they would only admire those who were at a different level than them. After all, if they could see the distance clearly, it was easy for them to feel that it was an obstacle they could overcome. Little Hai brought people to find Su Jin. After finding out about Yu Bing's intentions, he was a little surprised. In fact, after Yu Bing and Feng Kai left, Su Jin had thought about it for a long time in his office. The times were changing, and there had been more and more food factories in recent years. If one didn't advance, one would fall behind. In the past 2 years, the orders in the factory had begun to decrease. He knew that maintaining the status quo would definitely make things worse, but Su Jin knew that he didn't have the ability to reform the food factory. As he looked into Yu Bing's sincere gaze, he felt that her eyes had the power to make people want to believe in her. After thinking for a moment, he made a decision. Miss Yu, I'll leave it to you. Yu Bing smiled when she heard this. All right. After both sides reached an agreement, Yu Bing began to learn about the economic industry in the village. Other than planting agricultural crops like rice and wheat that had to be handed over to the country, the main economic industry was a food factory. Every family planted sweet potatoes. Yu Bing planned to teach them how to make sweet potatoes and crispy sweet potato pancakes. These two crops were high-yielding and the raw materials were cheap. Yu Bing told Su Jin her thoughts. When you plant potatoes and sweet potatoes next year, you can plan the land in the village in advance. This way, the cost of raw materials can be reduced and there will be more profit margin. After Su Jin heard this, he felt that Yu Bing had considered the actual situation in their village and felt that this suggestion was reliable. Yu Bing continued, these two types of snacks are not complicated, but the simpler the food, the harder it is to make it delicious. There are specialties in each field, so I suggest that chefs try their best to find people with specialized skills. Don't limit yourself to choosing from people with disabilities. You should also consider the market's feedback. There's still a lot of room for improvement in terms of the taste of the current products. As long as we can guarantee the taste, we can guarantee the number of orders. We can guarantee that the workers have work to do and the factory can earn money. Only then can the factory operate normally. We have to get our priorities straight. When Su Jin heard this, he nodded repeatedly. I didn't consider it carefully. Everyone is thinking that this food factory is specially built for this group of special people in the village, so they want to choose people from among them. The 5 female workers were hired because we considered that it would be inconvenient for them to do some heavy work. I don't know anything about running a factory. Miss Yu, it's all thanks to you this time. If you have any objections, feel free to ask. I'll do as you say. Yu Bing smiled and said, Mr. Su, don't be anxious. Listen to me finish before you make a judgment. What I said might not be right. The actual situation of every factory is different. Su Jin trusted Yu Bing very much now, so he said, all right, I'll listen to you finish first. Little Hai. Learn from her. If there was anyone Su Jin felt most at ease handing the factory over to, it would be Little Hai, who was bold and loyal. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 356 Recruiting Chefs. As Little Hai looked at Yu Bing, who was about his age, he wondered how this woman was so smart. The village chief didn't even understand such a difficult thing, so how could she explain it so logically at such a young age? Yu Bing thought for a moment. How about this? Let's see who's willing to apply for a kitchen position at noon today. We won't waste any time. They'll sign up for the competition on the spot and we'll choose 2 chefs first. At that time, I'll teach them the cooking method of the 2 food products I have first. There's another problem you have to pay attention to. You lack your own main products now. The few pastries you're currently producing are relatively ordinary and are mass market. Unless you can make the taste outstanding, it's best to produce some products that don't exist in the current market. When Little Hai heard this, he immediately asked, then can we directly make the 2 types of food you gave us into the main products? Yu Bing nodded with a smile. Of course, but this involves another problem. These 2 products are simple, so if someone who's good at making snacks thinks about it, they can roughly guess the method. Therefore, you have to pay attention to the stability of the taste during production to protect your customer base. Moreover, it's best to give out samples to get orders before the product is released to the market. It's best to distribute the goods at about the same time and distribute them as widely as possible so that everyone can associate the products with your brand. This way, even if someone wants to imitate you later, unless the other party's cooking skills are better than yours, customers will still favor Jinlan at the same price or if it's only slightly cheaper than yours. Su Jin sighed softly. Oh my God, no wonder our factory can't compete with others. There are too many twists and turns. It gives me a headache. Little Hai nodded in agreement. Su Jin marveled as he turned on the office radio and began to announce the recruitment of 2 chefs at noon. Because there was no age and gender restriction for chefs in Jinlan village, anyone in the village who felt that they had some decent culinary skills would participate proactively. The judges were the cadres of the village committee and the 2 specially invited judges, Yu Bing and Feng Kai. Jinlan had been operating for 8 years, and during this period, the equipment inside was added bit by bit, so it was much more complete than the equipment in Delicious Food Factory. Yu Bing asked everyone to make the snacks they were best at making. After intense competition, a newly married wife and a middle-aged woman were finally chosen. In the afternoon, Yu Bing asked the 2 new chefs to learn from the original chefs first before modifying them according to their own experience. After the finished products were out, the workers present tasted them together and everyone's eyes lit up. Their performance was within Yu Bing's expectations. When she ate the food from the Jinlan Food Factory yesterday, she felt that it wasn't easy for the factory to last so many years. It was all thanks to their cheap prices. Next, it was Yu Bing's turn to impart the formula. Yu Bing planned to make sweet potatoes first. This product was made from scallion pancakes and sweet potatoes. Scallion pancakes were a specialty of Treasure Island. Yu Bing steamed the sweet potatoes in the pot and started to make scallion pancakes. She poured a suitable amount of flour into the basin and added a little salt. Then, she poured warm water into it and stirred it into dough. Then, she kneaded it into dough and covered it with a steamed cloth. After 30 minutes, the dough was cut into the right size. She brushed cooking oil on the surface and waited for 40 minutes. Yu Bing used this time to make a souffle. After she stirred it evenly with flour, salt, and cooking oil, she adjusted it to a state where she could pull it. Then, she used a rolling pin to roll the small dough into a large piece of dough. Then, she kept pulling it around. She tried her best to pull it as big as possible without breaking the skin. Then, she used a brush to brush a layer of souffle. After that, she folded the thin-skinned dough into the shape of a folding fan. At this moment, the large piece of dough became a long strip with a few layers. Yu Bing picked up the dough slice and stretched it slightly on both sides. The longer the better. Then, she rolled it from left to right. After rolling it, Yu Bing kneaded the dough with her hand and rolled the dough into a pancake shape. The pancake skin of the scallion pancake was done. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 357 Group Construction. At this moment, the sweet potatoes were also cooked. After Yu Bing crushed the sweet potatoes into paste and covered half of the scallion pancake skin with the sweet potato paste, she folded the remaining half and cut it into strips. Then, she picked it up and twisted it twice. Then, she brushed the egg yolk on it and sprinkled white sesame seeds. After she placed it in the oven made from the earthen kiln, she took it out 20 minutes later. Then, it was time for the crispy potato pancakes. Yu Bing cut the potatoes into pieces first, then placed them in water to wash away the starch in the potatoes. After she added some salt, she stir-fried them until they were transparent. The small earthen bean was taken out of the pot and poured into the bowl. Then, starch was added and laid flat in a rectangular mold. After it was cooled, it was cut into small pieces and placed in the oil pot to be fried until it was a golden crisp. These two types of food looked golden and crispy, but they were sweet inside. On the other hand, the crispy sweet potato pancakes had the glutinous aroma of potatoes. After taking a bite, one could even taste potato particles in their mouth. Although they were fried and crispy, they were not greasy. This tastes amazing. This is the first time I've discovered that two staple foods that I'm sick of eating can be cooked like this. Moreover, this method is quite novel. I'm sure these two cooking methods will be mind-blowing. The workers in the factory were only given a small portion each. They put it in their mouths and slowly savored the aftertaste. Su Jin held Yu Bing's hand excitedly. Yu Bing, thank you so much. Things have been getting worse and worse for the past 2 years. We couldn't sell our goods anymore. Now, they've already suppressed us to the point where the price is only slightly higher than the cost. If we hadn't met you this time, it would have been good enough if the factory lasted until the end of the year. Yu Bing looked at Su Jin with a smile. Mr. Su, don't stand on ceremony. I'm just telling you the method. You'll have to rely on yourselves in the end. However, if there's anything you need, you can call our factory. Su Jin raised his hand to wipe away a tear from the corner of his eye. No one knew how much pressure he was under. If the factory really couldn't continue, he didn't know how to arrange the lives of these disabled people. Yu Bing was a little moved when she saw this scene. If it were a village chief like Sun Wang, he wouldn't care about the lives of these people. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but give them another piece of advice. Yu Bing raised her eyebrows as she looked at Su Jin and Little Hai with a meaningful smile. Mr. Su, Little Hai, if you can put down your pride, there's actually a place where you can definitely get a lot of orders. Su Jin and Little Hai looked at Yu Bing with delight, but Little Hai immediately expressed his stance. We're already so poor. What else can't we do? As long as it's not illegal, we're willing to do anything. Yu Bing said without hesitation, go to the government and complain that you're poor, or go to the commune first. The village is close to the commune. Take the commune's order and go to the county to complain. If you're not familiar with the county government's interpersonal relationships, you might not be able to take over all the departments. In any case, just try your best to convince them. Focus on the disabled. Tell them how disabled people refuse to burden the country. Even though they lost their hands and feet, they continue to contribute to the construction of the motherland's economy. Therefore, they have to place orders to support disabled people. We have to make them feel obliged to help. Su Jin was stunned when he heard this. Little Hai listened with relish and nodded repeatedly. I know a little about moral kidnapping. All these years, the disabled people in our village have been relying on themselves, so it's time for the government to express their gratitude. Yu Bing nodded in satisfaction when she saw Little Hai's reaction. He was quite promising. After explaining the matter to Jinlan Food Factory, Yu Bing and Feng Kai left Jinlan Village. Feng Kai turned to look at Yu Bing and marveled. I realized that no matter what happens, you always have a way to resolve it. Yu Bing pursed her lips smugly. She had no choice. After all, she had been reborn from the modern era. I just happen to know some things, so I can make some inferences. When the two of them returned to the shop, the others were about to get off work. Yu Bing brought everyone to the restaurant to eat a good meal as a reward for team building. Zhao Peng and Lin Ji had been mentally tortured by Little Hai and the others this week. Zhao Peng and Lin Ji were from poor families, so they usually bought groceries together and cooked in the dormitory. Now that they had come with Yu Bing to a restaurant, they were a little excited. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 358 picking them up. Yu Bing knew that the first batch of employees was actually under a lot of pressure. Whether the office could stay open or not had a lot to do with how many orders they could get. Therefore, she would bring her employees to eat out for every shop she went to. After all, gatherings and meals made people more relaxed. Yu Bing asked everyone to order dishes, which were pickled fish, stir-fried cured meat, stir-fried eggs, and sliced meat. After the dishes were served, everyone ate and chatted. After Yu Bing finished explaining the situation at the Jinlan Food Factory, Zhao Peng and Lin Ji sighed. I really didn't expect there to be such a story behind it. Feng Kai also sighed and said, everyone has their own hardships. Compared to their hardships, I think our hardships are really nothing. At least we're healthy and able-bodied. This is more important than anything else. Yu Bing, who had been tortured by illness for so many years, felt this deeply. In the past, she would also complain about why the heavens were so unfair to her. However, when she saw that people who were more miserable than her were still working so hard to survive, while she admired them, she also felt a lot of encouragement. Seeing that everyone was so emotional, Yu Bing told them her decision. In the future, the cheap food products in our food factory will mainly be distributed to the supply and marketing club. Only during holidays will we take the initiative to contact large factories and agencies. Unless customers take the initiative to look for us, don't take the initiative to contact them. Zhao Peng and Lin Ji were shocked to hear about this arrangement. They were not going to turn down business? After Feng Kai thought for a while, he understood what Yu Bing meant, but he was worried that he was wrong, so he probed, you want to give factories like Jinlan Food Factory some chances? The corners of Yu Bing's mouth curled up slightly. There are endless business opportunities. In the past, I always wanted to take down all the consumers in the middle and lower ranges, but actually, there are some times when not doing it is more meaningful. Do you still remember why Jinlan hated the offices of out-of-towners who came in and had the same customer group as them? Feng Kai naturally remembered. Not only did those people deceive them, but they also spread rumors and slandered them in order to snatch their market share. Yu Bing nodded vigorously. There are small factories in every place. We can't leave no space for others. Since we can eat meat, we have to at least give others some meat soup. I hope everyone will benefit. Feng Kai smiled at Yu Bing and said, you're clearly not leading a good life either, but you still can't bear to see such suffering. When Yu Bing heard this, she thought of the word Holy Mother. However, she didn't think of herself as a Holy Mother. She was just an ordinary person with empathy. She made this decision after confirming that she had the ability to lead everyone in a better direction. After solving the problem in each city, since the remaining shops were all very successful, they could visit shops in 2 cities per day. After Yu Bing gathered everyone's feedback, she returned to Yi Mountain Village with Feng Kai. This time, the person who drove the tractor to pick her up wasn't Wu Qing, but Xiao Xing. When Yu Bing saw him, she was stunned for a moment. Then, the corners of her mouth subconsciously curled up. Xiao Xing watched Yu Bing walk towards him with a relaxed expression and a smile on his lips. Feng Kai and Xiao Xing were quite familiar with each other because of their work relationship. Now that he suddenly saw the usually aloof Xiao Xing smile, he was shocked. However, he realized that the other party's eyes were fixed on Yu Bing. It wasn't until Feng Kai saw Xiao Xing take the initiative to go forward and help Yu Bing carry her luggage that he came to a realization. When he got into the tractor, he tactfully chose the back seat. As Xiao Xing drove, he asked Yu Bing about the situation of this business trip with concern. The sound of the tractor was loud, so in order to let Xiao Xing hear her clearly, Yu Bing whispered into his ear. When Yu Bing's sweet voice entered Xiao Xing's ears, at first, Xiao Xing listened attentively, but he gradually became distracted. The unique fragrance on Yu Bing's body wafted all the way to Xiao Xing's nose under the summer wind like a wisp of smoke before dissipating, leaving only the sound of Xiao Xing's heart racing. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 359 Nosebleed. Yu Bing was focused on talking about her trip to Jinlan village when she saw blood flowing from Xiaoxing's nose. She was shocked. Why is your nose bleeding? Yu Bing hurriedly took out a handkerchief from her purse and helped Xiaoxing hold his nose. Only then did Xiaoxing come back to his senses and look at Yu Bing helplessly. Xiaoxing was still driving, so Yu Bing was so startled that she hurriedly reached out and pinched Xiaoxing's chin gently. Then, she turned his head back to look at the road. Hurry up and stop the car. Let's change seats. I'll drive. Xiaoxing hurriedly stopped the car and raised his hand to press his nose. Only then did Yu Bing let go and change to the driver's seat. Feng Kai, who was behind, widened his eyes and glanced back and forth at the two people sitting in the front car. He had been watching the scenery outside, so now that he saw Xiaoxing's nosebleed, he felt that he had missed out on some shocking news. After Yu Bing started the tractor, she tilted her head slightly and asked Xiaoxing with concern, "Are you feeling better?" At this moment, Xiaoxing consciously distanced himself from Yu Bing. Otherwise, he felt that he would continue to bleed. "I'm fine. Perhaps the weather is a little too hot." Yu Bing didn't think too much about it and let Xiaoxing rest while she focused on driving. After entering the village, Yu Bing drove the car to the village committee building and parked it there. After Feng Kai said goodbye to the two of them and left first, Yu Bing ran into the office and handed the key to Mr. Wei for safekeeping. Xiaoxing quietly removed the handkerchief covering his nose. When he realized that the bleeding had stopped, he took off the handkerchief. As he looked at the bright red color in the middle, his ears burned. From the corner of his eye, he saw Yu Bing walking towards him from the office, so he immediately stuffed his dirty handkerchief into his pocket. When Yu Bing saw Xiaoxing's actions, she pursed her lips and chuckled but didn't expose him. She pretended that she didn't see it to prevent this man from feeling even shyer. "Let's go. I'll make some herbal tea for you later." Xiaoxing was just making up an excuse. At the thought of drinking bitter herbs, he said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble. I'll just drink more water." When Yu Bing saw Xiaoxing's resistant expression, she asked with interest, "Are you afraid of taking medicine?" Xiaoxing was stunned for a moment. Then, he looked at Yu Bing seriously and said, "Of course I'm not afraid of taking medicine, but it's better not to take it if possible." Yu Bing smiled and said affirmatively, "So you're afraid of taking medicine?" Xiaoxing opened his mouth to redeem his dignity, but when he saw Yu Bing's smug expression, Xiaoxing suddenly felt that nothing else was important anymore. As Yu Bing and Xiaoxing were acting lovey-dovey, when Yu Yin saw the happy Yu Bing from afar, she was overcome with anger. It had been almost 10 days since she called her brother last time. Although the two of them were a little far apart, she should have received the money after a week. Yu Yin waited patiently for another 3 days. After there was still no news today, she took half a day off to go to town to make a call. After the call went through, Yu Yin said that she wanted to look for Yu Shi. Yu Yi felt the other party freeze for a moment. "You're Yu Yin?" When Yu Yin heard the familiar voice, she remembered that the other party was Cui Jin. After all, the two of them had parted on bad terms a while ago. "Yes, I want to look for my brother." When Cui Jin heard Yu Yan's commanding tone, he wanted to hang up directly, but when he thought about how she was Yu Shi's sister, he endured it and replied coldly, "Yu Shi is out on a mission. I'll tell him when he comes back." When Yu Yin heard this news, she was a little puzzled. Her adoptive brother had clearly promised her to get it done that day. "When did my brother go on a mission?" Cui Jin replied aloofly, "It's a military secret, so I can't tell you." Yu Yin snorted. "Could it be that my brother has already returned to the army, but you deliberately didn't send me a message?" Cui Jin rolled his eyes over the phone. "You're delusional. Don't call if there's nothing important, lest you delay important calls." With that, Cui Jin hung up the phone quickly. When he saw that the soldier on duty had returned, he left. He cursed his bad luck. He kindly helped him guard the phone for more than 10 minutes, but he received a call from Yu Yin. On the other side, Yu Yin, who had been hung up, glared at the phone fiercely. She wished she could kill Cui Jin. Unwilling to give up, she called again. At this moment, the soldier on duty gave the same answer as Cui Jin had. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 360 Take medicine. However, Yu Yin didn't believe it. No matter how urgent the mission was, he didn't even have the time to inform others. After Yu Yin thought about it, she felt that either her adoptive brother had changed his mind and didn't want to send her money, so he found an excuse to lie to her, or her adoptive brother and Cui Jin had lied to her together. If it was the latter, Cui Jin must have said something bad about her. Yu Yin hung up and walked out of the post office. She recalled that the first time Cui Jin saw her, he wasn't like this at all. Yu Yin recalled that everything had changed since Jiang Chun hooked up with Cui Jin. Cui Jin's change definitely had something to do with Yu Bing. Who didn't know that Jiang Chun and Yu Bing were close? Yu Yin clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. Yu Bing. It's you again. Yu Yin had no choice but to think of another way. Unexpectedly, when she returned to the village, she saw Yu Bing and Xiaoxing chatting intimately. The more Yu Bing smiled, the more hatred Yu Yin felt. Last time, because Yu Bing had taken leave to go home, Yu Yin had changed her plans. In addition, this time, Yu Bing even urged Cui Jin not to let her adoptive brother give her money. However, Yu Yin didn't have the time to deal with Yu Bing yet. Her parents were in a hurry to gather money for her brother, so she had to settle this matter first before dealing with Yu Bing. Now, she couldn't contact her adoptive brother, and there were probably no intellectuals who could fork out 50 yuan. After Yu Yin thought about it, she decided that the fastest way was to borrow money from the village committee. After Yu Yin arrived at the village committee, she knocked on the open office door. Mr. Wei was checking the accounts and shouted without looking up, "Please come in." Yu Yin walked in with a smile and exchanged pleasantries. "Mr. Wei, you seem busy." Mr. Wei looked up. "Yu Yin, what's the matter?" Yu Yin replied with a smile, "I want to borrow 50 yuan. Mr. Wei frowned at Yu Yin. "You just borrowed 50 yuan this month, but you haven't even returned your work points yet." Yu Yin smiled apologetically and said, "There's still half a year left, so I'll work hard in the second half of the year. When my parents send me money next month, I'll return 5 yuan every month." If everyone said that, why would he need to do accounting? There would already be a bunch of debt already. No, your work points in the first half of the year are only about 30 yuan if they're exchanged for money. In the second half of the year, you'll only be able to earn 50 yuan at most. I was already very lenient to lend you 50 yuan last time. Seeing Mr. Wei's firm attitude, Yu Yin could only stomp her feet angrily and leave. When she returned to the dormitory and saw the other intellectuals, Yu Yan's heart skipped a beat. If borrowing from one person couldn't get her 50 yuan, she could borrow from 5 people. Borrowing money wasn't a glorious thing, and Yu Yin didn't want too many people to know, so she planned to borrow it from well-behaved people who didn't talk that much. In the small courtyard at the foot of the mountain, Yu Bing brewed a bowl of cold tea after dinner. She even found some herbs that were not very bitter. After brewing them, she went to the Xiao family's house. "Sister Yu Bing! Yu Bing!" The two little fellows shouted louder than the other, as if they were competing. Yu Bing smiled and replied to them one by one. After Yu Bing walked to Xiaoxing, who was reading under the eaves of the corridor, she pulled out a small stool from the side and sat down. "Drink it quickly." Xiaoxing frowned at the black herbal tea. Then, he moved to the side silently and distanced himself from the medicine bowl. "Yu Bing, I'm really fine." This side of Xiaoxing made Yu Bing feel for the first time that he was quite childish, and she advised patiently, "I specifically chose a less bitter version. You'll know after taking a sip." Xiaoxing was afraid that Yu Bing would be angry if he rejected her again, but he really didn't want to drink it. He could only frown and look at Yu Bing with a long face, in hopes that she could tell that he was very resistant. When Yu Bing saw Xiaoxing's pitiful appearance, her heart softened. However, when she thought of his nosebleed today, she felt that she couldn't indulge him. Yu Bing coaxed Xiaoxing with a smile, "I prepared fruit candy for you. You can squeeze your nose and finish it in 2 mouthfuls. Then, I'll put the candy in your mouth immediately. Believe me, you'll only taste sweetness." When the sound of suppressed laughter came from beside him, Xiaoxing didn't need to look to know that it was Xiaoli and Xiaolin. Thinking that his dignity as a big brother couldn't be ruined, he made up his mind, closed his eyes, and drank it in one go. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much.